War. When we think of it, certain names instantly come to mind. World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Iraq. Monumental conflicts that shaped entire generations. But history is also littered with smaller wars. Brief, localized, sometimes almost absurd in their beginnings, that nevertheless carried enormous consequences. Wars you won't find in most school textbooks. Wars overshadowed by bigger headlines. But wars that changed the world in ways few realize. In today's video, we'll uncover 3 of these forgotten wars. The Football War of 1969, when soccer matches between El Salvador and Honduras spiraled into an armed conflict. The Ogaden War, where a regional border dispute in East Africa became a proxy battlefield for the Cold War superpowers. And the Falklands War, proving that even the most remote islands could ignite fierce battles between powerful nations. These stories will surprise you, sometimes even shock you, because in the shadows of history's biggest wars, these conflicts left scars and legacies still visible today. So, let's dive into the first of our forgotten wars. And hey, if you love discovering these hidden corners of history, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps us bring you more stories like this. Part 1. The Football War, 1969. Imagine this, a game of football, fans cheering, flags waving, the drama of sport. Now imagine that same game becoming the spark that sets 2 countries ablaze in war. It sounds absurd, almost like satire. But in the summer of 1969, that's exactly what happened. The Football War between El Salvador and Honduras was one of the strangest wars of the 20th century. And while football, the beautiful game, gave the conflict its name, the roots went much deeper. In the 1960s, El Salvador was struggling. With a small land area but a rapidly growing population, land was scarce. Many Salvadorans migrated into neighboring Honduras, looking for work and farmland. By the late 1960s, nearly 300,000 Salvadorans, about 10% of El Salvador's population, were living in Honduras. But this migration fueled resentment. Honduran peasants felt their own land was being taken. Politicians in Honduras played on this anger, passing land reform laws that targeted Salvadoran migrants. Overnight, families who had lived there for decades were threatened with eviction. Then came the World Cup qualifiers of June 1969. El Salvador and Honduras were matched in a series of games to determine who would advance to the 1970 World Cup in Mexico. The matches weren't just about football, they became symbolic battlegrounds of national pride and resentment. In the first match, held in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, Salvadoran players reported harassment. Fans threw stones at the team bus, and Salvadoran supporters were attacked. Honduras won that match 1-0. A week later, in San Salvador, the reverse happened. The Honduran team endured sleepless nights as fireworks exploded outside their hotel. Honduran fans were attacked in the streets. El Salvador won 3-0. By the time of the decisive third game, tensions were sky high. El Salvador won again, 3-2. But what should have been a celebration turned into something darker. Riots broke out. The governments of both countries cut diplomatic ties. And within weeks, war had begun. On July 14, 1969, El Salvador launched a military offensive against Honduras. The Salvadoran Air Force used repurposed World War II-era planes, including P-51 Mustangs and Corsairs, in combat. That's right. While men were walking on the moon that same month, Central America was fighting a war with 1940s aircraft. The fighting lasted just 100 hours, about 4 days, but it was brutal. Around 3,000 people died, most of them civilians. Cities were bombed. Thousands of Salvadorans living in Honduras fled or were expelled. A ceasefire was brokered by the Organization of American States, but the war left scars. Trade between the 2 nations was cut for years, crippling Central America's regional economy. Families were torn apart as Salvadoran migrants were forced to return to an already overcrowded homeland. The Football War may have been short, but it exposed deep social problems. land inequality, migration, nationalism, that would fuel El Salvador's bloody civil war in the decades to come. And yet, many people today only remember it for its nickname. A war started over football. Part 2. The Ogaden War, 1977 to 1978. Now we move to East Africa, where the dry desert lands of the Ogaden region became the center of a global chess game. At first glance, the Ogaden War seems like a local border dispute between Ethiopia and Somalia. But very quickly, it turned into something much bigger. A stage where the Cold War superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union, clashed through proxies. The Ogaden Desert is a harsh region, but to Somalia, it held deep significance. Most of the people living there were ethnic Somalis. For decades, Somali nationalists dreamed of creating a Greater Somalia, uniting all Somali-inhabited regions of East Africa, including the Ogaden, which was part of Ethiopia. By the mid-1970s, Somalia was under the rule of Siad Barre, a military dictator who saw himself as the leader who could finally realize that dream. Meanwhile, Ethiopia was in chaos. Emperor Haile Selassie had been overthrown in 1974, and the new Marxist Derg regime was struggling to keep the country together. Siad Barre saw his chance. In July 1977, Somalia launched a full-scale invasion of the Ogaden. At first, they swept through Ethiopian defenses with surprising success. Somali forces, well-trained and supplied with Soviet weapons, captured most of the Ogaden within weeks. It looked like Somalia was on the verge of victory. But then, something strange happened. Both Ethiopia and Somalia had been Soviet allies. Now the Soviets had to choose, and they chose Ethiopia. The Soviets saw Ethiopia as more strategically important, given its size, location near the Red Sea, and its new Marxist government. So they switched sides, cutting off Somalia and throwing their full support behind Ethiopia. Cuba, under Fidel Castro, sent 15,000 troops to fight for Ethiopia. Soviet advisors and weapons flooded in. Suddenly, Somalia was facing not just Ethiopia, but a superpower-backed coalition. By March 1978, Somali forces were pushed back across the border. Their dream of Greater Somalia collapsed. The Ogaden War had major consequences. Somalia, betrayed by the Soviets, turned to the United States for support, flipping its allegiance in the Cold War. Ethiopia, meanwhile, became a staunch Soviet ally, receiving billions in aid and weapons. But for ordinary people, the war was devastating. Tens of thousands were killed. The Somali defeat humiliated Siad Barre, weakening his grip on power and setting Somalia on a path toward the state collapse and civil war of the 1990s. This was more than just a border war. It was a reminder of how local conflicts in the Cold War era could become battlegrounds for superpowers. And if you're finding these stories eye-opening, make sure to subscribe. We cover the kinds of history that textbooks often skip. Part 3. The Falklands War, 1982. Our third forgotten war takes us to the South Atlantic, where a cluster of wind-swept islands, home to more sheep than people, sparked a fierce conflict between Argentina and Britain. The Falkland Islands, or Islas Malvinas as they're called in Argentina, had been a disputed territory for over a century. Britain had controlled them since 1833, but Argentina always claimed them as its own. By 1982, Argentina was under a brutal military dictatorship, facing economic crisis and growing opposition at home. The generals, desperate to rally nationalist sentiment, decided to do something bold: reclaim the Falklands. On April 2, 1982, Argentine forces landed on the islands, quickly overwhelming the small British garrison. In Buenos Aires, crowds celebrated. For a moment, the dictatorship seemed to have restored its popularity. But they underestimated Britain's response. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, facing her own political troubles, saw the invasion as a direct challenge to British pride and power. She ordered a task force of warships and troops to sail 8,000 miles across the Atlantic to retake the islands. What followed was a dramatic 2-month conflict fought in harsh seas and bitter conditions. The British Navy faced deadly missile attacks. One Argentine strike sank the HMS Sheffield, shocking Britain. The British, in turn, sank the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano, killing over 300 sailors. On land, fierce battles were fought over rugged terrain. Despite Argentina's initial advantage, British forces, better trained and supplied, pushed forward. By June, Argentine troops surrendered. The Falklands War lasted just 74 days, but its impact was huge. For Britain, victory revived national confidence and cemented Thatcher's leadership. For Argentina, defeat destroyed the military dictatorship, leading to the return of democracy. And yet, the sovereignty dispute never went away. To this day, Argentina still claims the islands. The Falklands remain a reminder that even the most remote places on Earth can ignite global conflict. So next time you hear about a forgotten war, remember, there's no such thing as a small war. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more untold history, and share it with someone who loves learning about the past, because sometimes the forgotten wars are the ones that teach us the most.